it's a mystery story about somebody finding out the source of a bang in her head. But it's also really an immersion in Colombia. One of the things that Apichatpong and I are so proud of is how embraced the film was by Colombia. It was Colombia's entry, for what it's worth, into the Foreign Academy Awards as a Colombian film made by a Thai and a Scottish person. We were very, very, very proud of that. And that was meaningful to us for a particular reason, because when we started talking about the film, which was 15 years before we actually started shooting, we wanted to make a film about a place that neither of us knew. Because it was clear to us that we didn't want me to just go to Thailand and be like a fish out of water in Thailand, or for him to come to Scotland and not quite know how Scotland worked. We wanted neither of us to know how it worked. Someone knew. And Colombia was the place we landed on and we really dug ourselves into. And so Colombia's embrace of the film was really meaningful to us. It's about resonance. It's about trauma. And it's about ghosts. I would say it's about grief, both in terms of the fact that Jessica, who's the protagonist, who I play, is, and it's very only mentioned a couple of times, grieving her husband. He died fairly recently. So she's in that state of grief, of relatively fresh grief, like within a year. I always feel there's a sort of strange science to the 2-year mark, and she's south of that. She's not there yet. So she's still in that amniotic fluid of disconnect, really, with the world, which is my experience of fresh grief, particularly. And yeah, it's about someone who, well, it's funny I use the word disconnect, because in a way, it's about deep connection while in that disconnected state. So she's sort of socially disconnected, but she's in every other way deeply wired in to listening to stones and hearing the birds in a new way and relating to the wind, that feeling of real deep connection, which that state of grief can kind of open up to one to. So those are some of the things I would say. That's not a very traditional synopsis.
Yeah, well, it's not a traditional film, so it's I feel like you could go on for hours, and I have done in terms of my own thinking around the film,
Yeah.
talking about what it's about, because it's about lots of things. But I think you've summarized really well the key like core of it, and then it goes and touches on so many things. So no, I think that was really really well
Good.
done.
Good.
It's actually interesting that you picked up on the sort of like the sensitivity of Jessica, because I was wondering like whether that is because that she's in this state of grief, and this state of disconnection, that she is having these like sensitive moments, or whether she as a person was kind of like that. Because I think that, so just as like a caveat, sort of like I'm autistic, and I'm very it's a very sensory film. And I suppose that some of the things that she was doing, like she was just playing with water with her foot in one bit. And I was like,
Yes.
yeah, it just kind of like felt very the kind of things that I do. So I was like, this
Very
character is
familiar.
interesting, yeah.
I would I have not been diagnosed neurodivergent, but I think it's only a trip to a doctor away. I would say that playing with water with your foot is a very good way of spending part of your life. I think that that kind of state of awakeness and constantly being on receive is not talked about very often, certainly not shown, but I would suggest that more of us actually live that experience than talk about it. And I would say that it's grace. I think that's really a way of being alive that's to be cherished and valued, certainly within society. But individually, yeah, I think it's so. Who knows? It's a very good question. I don't know what Jessica was like 5 years earlier. Actually, we talk about revisiting her, Joey. When I mention Joey, I mean Apichatpong. You know,
Yes.
most Thai people have a short name. They're called Apichatpong Weerasethakul, but they're actually called Joe.
Yes.
It's very handy and very, very kind and helpful to us. But Joey and I talk about revisiting Jessica and bringing her forward into other projects, because we want to her. She's a lightning rod. She's a receiver.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I thought I mean, I love the film a lot and I really just love watching her experience the world. Because like you say, we don't see that often. And, you know, a lot of us are doing those kind of things in private to navigate our feelings or to just to feel something or to connect to the world in a different way. But it's often in private. So it's just really nice to have those long shots of somebody alone,
Yeah.
feeling connected in a different way and searching for connection. So yeah, I just think I mean, I'm a big fan of the film clearly, but
So it
um,
is.
could you talk us through a little bit about like the process of getting into that headspace that Jessica's in? Like, how did you go about that?
Well, I'll tell you, I will attempt to answer that question, but it might be helpful if I tell you about the development of our thinking around the whole project, because that
Yeah,
might come, it's the kind of cherry on the cake. So
mm-hmm.
the way it all evolved is that Joey and I met in a great way, which is I met him through the cinema. I met him through his film Tropical Malady, which I had the privilege to see at Cannes in 2004. And I had the double privilege of being on the jury and was able to be instrumental in giving him a prize. That's an extraordinary film, and if you haven't shown it to your illustrious audience, I suggest you find it and do so, because it's really something else. It's yeah, it's the pre. No, it's not. Sorry, I was going to say it's the previous film to this. The previous film to this, of course, is Cemeteries of Splendor, and the one before that is Uncle Boon Me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, he creates a cinema that is becoming acknowledged as something really, yeah, he's a pioneer of a kind of, a few years ago it was talked of as slow cinema, and there are other filmmakers like Lav Diaz from the Philippines who also are talked about as masters of slow cinema. I would suggest that Joey's kind of moving through that, which it doesn't mean to say his cinema isn't slow, but it's there are some people who are slower and who are kind of not only slow, but principally slow. And he's other things. He's not just
Yeah.
slow. He's also poetic and ruminative and surreal. I mean, the way in which he marries and sort of dovetails a kind of documentary, fine tooth comb way, people's sort of way of just moving around the world in a very undramatic, very sort of quotidian way, with truly remarkable things like meeting a tiger in the forest and the tiger talking to you, or sitting down for dinner and your dead son is beside you, but he happens to have been turned into a monkey. These because he's marrying the atmospheres and the grain of these two possibilities, it's really unique. So
Yeah.
he's all for that. Anyway,
Mm.
so I fell in love with his cinema. Having seen Tropical Malady, I then saw everything I could see. And I wrote about him in an article. I can't remember where it was published, but he read it and he started writing to me. I was writing about Dream. I was writing about falling asleep in the cinema, and that I actually believe that falling asleep in the cinema, believe it or not, is a great high compliment to the filmmakers. I really mean it. I really mean it. I think that if a film, and I mean, I am speaking as somebody who had twins, and if ever I went to the cinema during the early years, I would fall asleep immediately. That was exhaustion. But I
Mm.
mean, latterly, if you haven't had twins and they aren't tiny, that feeling of being drawn into a kind of reverie by a certain kind of film, I don't think that's a diss. I think that's you're taking up an invitation. Anyway, I was writing about this
Mm.
in an essay, and he read it, and we became let's make work together, and then we started to chip away at what that might be. And the first thing we landed on was we wanted to make something about someone who was an alien. And okay, so that was the first flag on the pole. And then there was the whole question about where were they? And I already described this whole question of where would I be? And we really didn't want me to, that sort of, there is a way of being slightly grafted on, especially as a super white person, onto a so-called exotic landscape that feels really beneath all of us.
Yeah.
That we really did not want to go down that route. So it wasn't going to be Thailand. And so then we landed on Colombia. And what we were looking for, I mean, one of the things that we spoke about when we first started talking, I live in the Highlands of Scotland, but I'm actually from the Borders, which is where I am now in my family's home. And, you know, Joey makes a lot of films about inherited trauma, the trauma of the land, the trauma of old massacres, the way in which we all live with the phantoms of violence around us all the time. And and one of the first things we actually bonded over was that, because as a born and bred borderer, I mean, you're not that far away, but this stretch of country, both south of the border and north of the border, where we
Yeah.
are, right just north of the border, is blood soaked.
Yeah.
And that I was brought up with that. I was brought up with that knowledge. My father was always distilling in us a respect, actually, for the history of this part of the world, and yeah, and a kind of reverence for it. There's
Mm.
a farm not that far from where we live called Sorrowless Fields, which is called Sorrowless Fields because it's the only farm that didn't lose somebody in the Battle of Flodden, which
Oh,
is
wow.
like, can't remember it's like, what is that? 1470 or something. Anyway, so that was an early bond. We wanted to make a film about how to live, how to pass through as a detached being, or as an alien being, as some kind of a being not in denial, really, someone awake in a place that has these resonances. And so we knew it wasn't going to be Scotland, we knew it wasn't going to be Thailand. And Colombia is a really good candidate. Colombia, we went there because both he and I went to the Cartagena Film Festival, which is a really great film festival, and quite quickly felt the vibe there, and that's a very familiar resonance, and there's like all sorts of bells clanging inside when you're in Colombia.
Mm.
And so that was the second. So an alien in Colombia, that was the start. And then this is the wonderful thing about long-term, slow-grown, homegrown filmmaking. It took so long that our lives were happening to us, and we just wove what was happening to us into the film. There was a point at which Joe started to have this terrible banging in his head. It's called exploding head syndrome. You can actually Google it. It's a thing that exists.
Yeah, I did look it up actually. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is almost unexplained. I don't know. But anyway, for about a year, he had this thing. He couldn't really sleep. And because one's so tense, one thinks it's going to happen all the time. And so that got woven into the film. This was sort of, oh, maybe Jessica's experiencing this. And then I was in the sort of cauldron, hot seat of various looking after my parents who were dying and then died, and looking after various other people who were departing. So I was in this sort of, you know, cozy bath of grief constantly. And so we wove that in as well, that she's in a state of grief. And we just kept folding things in, like making a cake. We would just put in a bit of cocoa powder and we would fold it in. And then we went there. And it was really when we went there, when he was developing the screenplay, that it started to, I'm now coming around to answering your question. How did we sort of how did I step into that rhythm? It was really being there. And we talked a lot about Jessica walking, moving as if she's underwater. That felt really meaningful to us. We dressed her in these clothes, which were kind of indeterminate. They're slightly gender free. They're actually men's clothes. I wear men's jeans and men's shirts. And there is one woman's kind of blouse that I have, which we bought in the village. But everything else is pretty indeterminate.
Yeah.
So she's sort of not defined in a way. And walking slowly was very important. But it wasn't just about being slow, it was about mindful, actually. It was about mindful walking.
Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. Yeah, because she's taking everything in and she's really paying attention. And I think that like there's certain moments in the film, like I think maybe quite near the beginning, it seems like she's quite like hyper vigilant and a bit twitchy, like there's certain like little sounds that she's really sort of like jolting at, and I found that quite interesting. Yeah, to watch that
well,
play out.
once she leaves the city, so it starts in Bogota, which is an amazing capital city. I mean, no, it's not actually a capital, is it, Bogota? No, but it's a huge city,
Mm.
and wonderful city, by the way, if ever anybody has the chance to go.
Oh, yeah.
But when she leaves the city and she starts going into the country, things change again for her.
Hmm.
And one of my favorite shots of the film, which is one of my favorite shots of all of Joey's films, is there's one shot out of a window. And
Yes.
he just does that thing he does, which is leaves it for long enough
Hmm.
for some birds to come in from one side. Birds have a little poodle around. Birds go away. Another bird comes. And frankly, that's bird television for me. You could just sit and watch
Yeah.
that all day. I mean, that's cinema.
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
And he waits. He has this patience. Yeah. And
Mm.
it feels like she gets more patience out of the city.
Yes.
Well, there are less people, I suppose, and she's sinking down, and she's also getting closer to the source. I'm not actually going to commit any words to it, but you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
We know at the end that she's getting closer to the source, so maybe her vibration just calms down a little.
Yeah, and obviously, like you say, like she's extra sensitive, she's taking things in, so it makes sense that when she changes environment, that she's interacting with a more sort of natural and ancient sort of world than the modern world. And yeah, there's so many themes that are running through it, and I guess because there is so much space within the film for you to reflect yourself as an audience member, you're obviously adding your own sort of experiences onto things. And yeah, I mean, I love sort of films like that that let you think so much afterwards, because I saw it when it came out, and still years later, occasionally I think about it and think like, oh, like I don't know, I
Mm.
just that's for me is like that's the most rewarding experience of cinema, is to take it away with you.
But but Sophie, you used the right word. It is an experience. I mean, it's not a narrative. That's why, in a way, it was quite almost, uh, a little superficial to start off when talking about synopsis, when talking about a plot. It's the plot is something, it's a little something, but it's really the tip of the iceberg. The iceberg is the experience of the place, the experience of the frame, the experience of the movement in the frame, whether it's the flashing lights of those cars with the alarms going off, or whether it's the dog following Jessica through the streets, or whether it's Jessica herself, or whether it's the birds. And then, very importantly, it's the sound. Because the soundscape of the film, which is not the plot, that's not the narrative, but it is the world of the film. That is so important. And we were able, very, very gratefully, to pull off something with Neon, who was the studio that put money into the film and were distributing it in the States. We made a suggestion to them, which they picked up, which was that it should not be streamed. I mean, I think these years later, it is possible to find it here and there.
Yeah.
But for at least a couple of years, you could not find it for watching on a phone or on a laptop or even on a telly at home. You had to go to a cinema and sit in a crowd, as you all are now, and watch it on a big screen with a good sound system, and not pause it and go and put the kettle on, which is really important for a film like this, because we all love watching things on the end of the bed. And we do it, and hooray. But there are some films that if you pause them to go and put the kettle on, you might not pick it up again. You might say, well, let's finish it tomorrow, which is fair enough with all sorts of things. But with a film like this, it really kind of isn't, because there's a sort of hermetic seal around it. And you're in it. You're in Colombia when you're in this film, this screening, and you want to stay there. And it's not as long as so many films that have been made since. It's not like, Killers of the Flower Moon, which I also love, but that's a test for all sorts of bladders, etc. This isn't a test in that way, but I think it's worth trying to find a film like this on the big screen, because it's so much more than the sum of its parts. I'm sure you agree, since you have a cinema.
Absolutely, because I think that, I mean, I'm a filmmaker myself, and I really